When I found that baby photo on my husband's phone, I felt the air leave my lungs. It wasn't just any baby, it was me. I knew that round face, those dimples, the tiny scar just above my eyebrow. The same scar I'd gotten when I tumbled off the couch at 2 years old. It was a picture I'd seen only once in my life, tucked inside my adoptive mother's dresser, wrapped in yellowed tissue paper. She'd said it was the only baby picture that existed of me. So how was it sitting in my husband's private photo album? The glow from the phone screen made the room look ghostly. I was sitting cross-legged on our bed, the hum of the ceiling fan above me, my pulse roaring in my ears. The photo was saved in a folder labeled Before Us. Before us? Before me? When I heard the garage door creak open, I locked the screen and placed the phone face down on the nightstand. My fingers were trembling. "Hey, babe," Mark called downstairs, his voice echoing through the hallway. "You up here?" "Yeah," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. He came up the stairs with that easy smile of his, shaking off his jacket. The smell of rain clung to him, that faint earthy scent that used to make me feel safe. "You look tired," he said, leaning down to kiss my forehead. "Rough day?" I forced a smile, just the usual. He pulled off his boots, humming that little tune he always did when he was relaxed. A half-remembered song from the 90s, something his mom used to sing. He had no idea I'd just discovered something that didn't make sense. That night, he fell asleep within minutes, his arm draped across my waist. I lay still, staring into the dark. The image of that baby burned into my mind. The timestamp on the photo said June 17th, 1991. That was my birthday. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains, warm and deceptive. Mark was already downstairs making coffee, and I could hear the twins arguing over cereal. For a moment, I wanted to pretend everything was normal. Our mornings were always predictable, a kind of choreography we'd practiced for years. He brewed his dark roast, I packed the boys' lunches, we traded quick smiles over the hum of the toaster. But now, every detail felt off. His easy laugh, his unbothered eyes, the way he brushed a kiss across my shoulder as he passed me. If he was hiding something, he was hiding it well. "Mommy, can you sign my permission slip?" Drew asked, holding up a crumpled piece of paper. "Sure, sweetheart," I said automatically, taking it from him. My hand shook slightly as I wrote my name. When I looked up, Mark was watching me. "You okay? You seem distracted lately." I swallowed. "Just tired. I didn't sleep much." He nodded, pouring another cup of coffee. "You've been pushing too hard. Maybe take a long weekend, yeah?" He was so calm, so caring. I hated that my mind was spinning with doubt. At school, I couldn't focus. I worked as a guidance counselor, listening to teenagers sort through heartbreak and anxiety, but that day, I was the one holding back tears. One of my students, a quiet sophomore named Alicia, sat in my office talking about how she'd found her biological mother through a DNA site. Her eyes glowed when she said, "It felt like meeting a part of myself I didn't know existed." Her words stayed with me all afternoon. I'd always known I was adopted. My mother, Denise, told me when I was 10. She'd said that my birth mother was young and wanted me to have a better life. It had never been a big mystery, just a closed door I never felt the need to open. Until now. That night, when Mark came home, he brought Thai food, my favorite. He opened a bottle of wine, poured me a glass, and smiled across the table like everything was ordinary. "You've been quiet all week. Something wrong?" I hesitated. The words almost slipped out. "I found a baby photo of me in your phone." But something stopped me. Maybe fear? Maybe the fragile hope that there was an explanation I hadn't thought of yet. Instead, I said, "Just school stuff. A student situation got to me." He nodded sympathetically and changed the subject to weekend plans. I watched him laugh, talk about the boys' soccer game, about fixing the leaky gutter, all while that secret burned inside me. Later that night, when the house was silent, I picked up his phone again. He'd left it charging on the nightstand. My heart thudded in my throat. I unlocked it. I knew his passcode. He'd never hidden it. I opened the same folder. The baby photo was still there, but now I saw something else. Another image, half blurred. It was a woman standing by a hospital bed holding a newborn wrapped in a pink blanket. The timestamp said June 1991. My throat went dry. The woman's face, she looked familiar. Not identical, but enough to make my skin crawl. She looked like me. Older, maybe in her 40s, but the same jawline, the same wide-set eyes. I zoomed in until the image pixelated. The tag under the photo said simply, Grace. I didn't know any Grace. Why would my husband have this picture? I checked the file details. Both photos had been added 6 months ago, around the time Mark started taking those mysterious late business calls in the garage. I closed the phone and sat there in the dark, my pulse hammering. Was my husband digging into my past? Or had he known something about me, something I didn't? The next morning, I decided to test him. Over breakfast, I said casually, Hey, I was thinking of printing some old photos for an album. You have any from before we met? He looked up from his eggs. Before we met? Not many. Why? Just curious, I said, watching him. Trust me, I was a dork. Not much to see. No flicker of guilt. No pause. Either he was telling the truth or he was a very good liar. That afternoon, while he was at work, I drove to my mother's house. Denise lived 15 minutes away, in the same beige 2-story where I'd grown up. She was in her garden, trimming roses when I arrived. Lily, she said, surprised. You didn't call. I know, I said, forcing a smile. I just needed to talk. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and laundry detergent, the scent of my childhood. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the framed photos lining the walls, me at prom, me on my wedding day, me holding my newborn twins. But nowhere, not once, was there a picture of me as a baby. Mom, I said softly, you told me once there was only one picture of me as a baby. Do you still have it? She froze for a second. Yes, it's upstairs. Why? I just wanted to see it again. She hesitated, then went upstairs. When she returned, she handed me the little wooden box I remembered. Inside, wrapped in the same yellowed tissue paper, was the photo, the same one I'd seen on Mark's phone. I looked at my mother, my heart pounding. Mom, where did you get this picture originally? Her eyes flickered. From your adoption file. Why? Did anyone else ever see it? Or could have copied it? She frowned. No, it's always been here. Lily, what's going on? I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. Mom, do you know anyone named Grace? She went still. The color drained from her face. When I asked my mother if she knew anyone named Grace, it was like time stopped. The question just hung there between us, trembling in the silence. Her hands, still holding the photo box, began to shake. She didn't look at me. Instead, she walked slowly to the counter, set the box down, and gripped the edge as if she needed it to stay upright. Where did you hear that name? She whispered. I swallowed hard. I saw it on a picture. A woman holding a baby, me, in the hospital. Her name was labeled Grace. Mom's lips pressed together. Her eyes filled with something that looked a lot like fear. Lily, you weren't supposed to know that name. My stomach dropped. So you do know her? She nodded faintly. Grace was your birth mother. I felt my pulse in my throat. The room spun for a second. You told me she was young, that she didn't want to keep me. She was young, my mom interrupted, her voice trembling, but that's not all of it. I could feel something dark creeping in. What do you mean that's not all of it? Mom sank into the chair across from me, rubbing her temples. I wasn't supposed to tell you anything. Your adoption file was closed. But Grace, she didn't just give you up. It was complicated. She had a breakdown after you were born. She wanted to keep you, but your biological father's family didn't. They made the decision for her. Her father's family? I asked, slowly. No, your father's family. Grace wasn't married. The man she was involved with came from a wealthy family who didn't want a scandal. So they paid for everything, the hospital, the adoption, and made sure she'd never contact you again. I stared at her. You knew all this, and you never told me? Tears filled her eyes. You were my daughter. That was all that mattered to me. I didn't want you to feel like someone had just given you away. My chest tightened. Did you ever know who my biological father was? She hesitated. No, the papers were redacted. All I ever saw were initials, M.R. M.R. My breath caught. My husband's name was Mark Reynolds. For a long time, I didn't say anything. I just stared at the table, feeling like I might be sick. That's impossible, I finally whispered. It has to be a coincidence. But the world around me already felt like it was tilting, as if reality had started to slip. That night, I didn't go home right away. I sat in my car at the edge of the grocery store parking lot, the baby photo on my lap. My hands were shaking too hard to hold my phone steady, but I couldn't stop scrolling through Mark's contacts, texts, and call logs. There it was again, a number labeled G. Allen. No photo, no last name, just the initial G. When I tapped the call history, I saw they'd spoken dozens of times, sometimes late at night, sometimes in the middle of the day when he said he was on site. I copied the number and ran a quick reverse lookup online. My heart nearly stopped when the result came up. Grace Allen, Springfield, Missouri. Grace Allen. I was shaking so badly I had to put the phone down. Mark had been talking to my biological mother for months. But why? When I finally drove home, it was almost midnight. The house was dark, except for the glow of the TV in the living room. Mark was half asleep on the couch, the remote still in his hand. He looked peaceful, almost boyish, and for a moment I wanted to believe this was all a misunderstanding, that somehow there was a logical reason for it all. But the lies were piling too high to ignore. I went upstairs quietly, pulled out my phone, and texted the number labeled G. Allen. Hi, this is Lily. We need to talk. The reply came 10 minutes later. I was wondering when you'd find me. I stared at the words until they blurred. She knew me. She'd been waiting. The next afternoon, when the boys were at a friend's house and Mark was working late, I drove to the address I'd found online. It was an older neighborhood, quiet, with tree-lined streets and worn picket fences. The house was small and white, with faded shutters and a garden full of wildflowers. I sat in the car for a long time before finally stepping out. My knees were trembling. The woman who opened the door looked like the older version of the face I'd seen in the photo. She froze when she saw me. Lily, she whispered. Her voice cracked on my name. I didn't say anything at first. I just looked at her. This stranger with my eyes, my cheekbones, my same nervous habit of tugging at her sleeve. Finally, I said, "So, it's true. You're Grace?" She nodded slowly, tears already spilling down her cheeks. I've been trying to find a way to tell you. I didn't know Mark would... Mark? My voice sharpened. What does my husband have to do with this? She swallowed hard, stepping back. Maybe you should come in. The house smelled like lavender and dust. Family photos lined the mantel. None of me, of course, just Grace with a small dog and a few pictures of her younger self. I sat stiffly on the couch while she paced. I didn't know he was your husband when he first contacted me. He reached out months ago. He said he was looking into your family history for a surprise, something for your birthday. I froze. My birthday? She nodded. He said he wanted to do something meaningful for you. He found me through an old adoption registry. I thought it was sweet that he wanted to reconnect us. We talked for hours. I told him everything about the adoption, about the hospital, about how much I wanted you. He said he wanted to make sure you knew how loved you were. My chest ached. So he never told you that he was married to me? Her eyes widened. He didn't at first. I found out later when he sent me that photo, the one of you and the twins. That's when I realized who you were. I panicked. I told him I couldn't keep talking to him behind your back. That's when he stopped calling. I felt dizzy. So he lied to you too? She nodded grimly. I think he thought he was protecting you, but he didn't understand how wrong it was to go behind your back. I stood up, pacing. He's been lying for months, Grace. He had my baby picture on his phone. He's been sneaking around, talking to my biological mother, and he didn't tell me anything. Grace looked down, guilt in her eyes. He said he wanted it to be a surprise, that he was planning something special. He told you you'd had a hard year and he wanted to bring you peace. Tears stung my eyes. Peace? He's given me the opposite of peace. I left without saying goodbye. The drive home felt endless, a blur of headlights and tears. When I pulled into our driveway, I saw Mark's car parked out front. He was home. Inside, he was in the kitchen, cooking dinner like nothing was wrong. Hey, sweetheart, he said, smiling as he stirred pasta. You're home early. Everything okay? I dropped my purse on the counter. My voice came out flat. You talked to her. His hand froze mid-stir. What? You talked to Grace Allen, my biological mother. The color drained from his face. For a second, neither of us moved. The only sound was the faint hiss of the stovetop. Then, quietly, he said, You weren't supposed to find out like this. I stood there, shaking. The air between us felt too heavy to breathe. Mark turned off the burner and leaned against the counter, his jaw tight. What do you mean I wasn't supposed to find out like this? I demanded. You've been lying to me for months, Mark. He rubbed a hand over his face, sighing like a man who'd been cornered. I wasn't lying, Lily. I was trying to do something good, something right for once. By sneaking behind my back? By contacting my biological mother without telling me? My voice cracked. How is that supposed to be good? He stepped forward, his tone softening. I didn't mean to hurt you, I swear. I just wanted to understand where you came from, to find out more about you, your past. You've always said you wished you knew your roots and... Stop, I shouted, slamming my hand on the counter. The noise startled us both. I told you that because I trusted you. I told you that because it's the deepest wound I have. You had no right to dig into it without me. He looked pained, almost desperate. I thought I was helping. I found her by accident, actually. I was going through the adoption files. How? I cut him off. Those are closed records. He hesitated, then looked away. I might have reached out to someone in the county office. You what? You used your company's contacts to dig into my adoption files? He didn't answer, but the silence said enough. Unbelievable, I muttered, backing away. Do you even hear yourself? Lily, he said, taking a careful step toward me. Please, I was trying to surprise you. I wanted you to finally have answers. Grace was kind. She told me everything. Everything? I said sharply. Like who my biological father was? That made him freeze. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. I don't know anything for sure, he said finally, his voice small. She never told me his name, but the way he said it, hesitant, strained, made my stomach twist. You're lying! I'm not, he said quickly. I swear, I don't know. Then why did you look like you saw a ghost when my mom mentioned the initials MR? The color drained from his face. I stepped closer, trembling. You knew, didn't you? You knew those were your initials. You knew what it meant. That's why you didn't want me to find out. Lily, listen. No, you listen, I snapped. I need the truth, Mark, right now. Did you know my biological father? He stared at me for a long time, before finally lowering his gaze. Yes, he whispered. The world tilted. I gripped the counter to steady myself, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. You mean to tell me? My voice was barely audible. My biological father was your uncle? He nodded again, silent tears in his eyes. Oh my God, I covered my mouth, the world spinning. So you knew. You knew we were connected. He dropped to his knees beside me. No, not at first, I swear, Lily. When we met, I had no idea. I didn't even know you were adopted. But when I found out who your birth mother was and who your father was, you still stayed with me, I cried. I loved you, he said hoarsely. I love you. You're my wife. None of that changes how I feel. It changes everything, I shouted, standing abruptly. You should have told me the second you knew. Instead, you hid it. You talked to Grace. You built this web of lies and decided what I should and shouldn't know. He reached out for me, but I stepped back. Lily, please, I was trying to protect you. Protect me from what? From the truth? From myself? From the pain, he said, his voice breaking. Do you think I don't know how much this would hurt you? That's why I wanted to do it carefully. I was going to tell you when I had all the facts, when I could explain everything. But you already knew enough, didn't you? He didn't answer. My voice cracked. You looked into my past, and you found out I was the daughter of your uncle, and you just kept living with me, like nothing was wrong. He stood, tears rolling down his face. Lily, please don't make it sound like, what? I interrupted. Like you married me knowing the man who fathered me was your uncle? Like you sat next to me at every family gathering, smiling, pretending nothing was off? I didn't know how to tell you, he said weakly. I thought I could handle it, that maybe it didn't matter since we're not blood related in a direct way. Not direct, I laughed bitterly. Do you hear yourself? You make it sound like we're talking about a tax form. He stepped forward, eyes pleading. Lily, please, you're my wife. You're the mother of my kids. I don't care about the past. I only care about us. But I couldn't even look at him. I turned away, wiping tears from my face. You should have cared about the truth, Mark. You should have cared about me enough to trust me with it. I walked out before he could say another word. That night, I stayed in a motel 2 towns over. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that baby picture, Grace's face and Mark's eyes, filled with that guilty kind of love that makes you sick just to think about. By morning, I'd made a decision. I needed answers that only Grace could give me. I called her, my voice trembling. Did you ever know a man named Michael Reynolds? There was a long pause on the other end. Then, quietly, she said, yes, he was your father. I closed my eyes. Did you know his nephew is my husband? Her breath hitched. Oh, Lily, no, that can't be true. It is, I whispered, and he knew. He knew before I did. Oh my God, she whispered. He told me his name was Mark, but I never thought... Her voice broke. If I had known... It's not your fault, I said, though the words felt heavy and hollow. Lily, she said gently, you don't deserve this kind of pain. Please don't let it destroy you. But it already had. The next evening, I went home only long enough to pack a bag. Mark tried to stop me at the door.
"Lily, please, we can fix this. We can talk to someone, go to therapy." I looked at him, tears streaming down my face. "There's no therapy for betrayal this deep, Mark. You lied to me about who I am. You turned my entire life into a secret." "I did it out of love," he said quietly. "Then maybe your love isn't the kind I need." I walked out and didn't look back.
When I left that night, I didn't plan on coming back. Not for a while, at least. I drove aimlessly until the highway lights blurred into ribbons of gold and white. I kept thinking about how my entire life, every memory, every piece of who I thought I was, had suddenly changed shape. I stayed with my friend, Mia, who lived about 40 minutes away. She didn't ask too many questions. She just gave me a blanket, poured me some tea, and said quietly, "Whatever it is, you'll get through it." I didn't tell her everything, just that Mark had been keeping secrets about my past. I couldn't bring myself to say the rest out loud yet, that the man I married was related to the father I never knew. For the next few days, I moved through life like I was underwater. I'd sit by Mia's window, watching the sun rise, wondering how many years of my marriage had been built on a lie. Mark called a few times, then stopped when I didn't answer. His texts came less and less frequent. "I love you. Please come home. Let's talk." I couldn't. Not yet. But word gets around fast in small-town circles. By the end of the week, Mark's mother, Evelyn, called me. "Lily," she said, her voice gentle, too gentle. "Can we talk?" I hesitated. Evelyn and I had always been close. She treated me like her own daughter, but now even that felt tainted. "About what?" I asked. "About everything," she said softly. "Please, come by the house. You deserve to hear some things from me." I didn't want to, but something in her voice, regret maybe, made me agree. When I pulled into her driveway that afternoon, the air was thick with the smell of lilacs. The same bushes she'd planted the summer I first met Mark. It almost hurt to remember how happy we'd been then. Evelyn greeted me at the door with red-rimmed eyes. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. Inside, the house looked the same. Family photos on the mantel, the faint scent of lemon cleaner, the quiet ticking of the old clock in the hallway. But it felt different now. Heavier somehow. We sat down at the kitchen table. "I know you must hate us," she began, twisting her hands in her lap. "And you have every right to. But please believe me when I say none of us knew until recently." I stared at her. "You mean you didn't know your brother-in-law was my father?" She shook her head. "Not until Mark told me. He came to me a few months ago, right after he found out. He was devastated. He didn't know what to do." "Devastated?" I said bitterly. "He didn't look devastated when he kept smiling at me every day, pretending nothing was wrong." Tears welled up in her eyes. "He was scared, Lily. Scared to lose you. Scared to break your heart. He thought if he just handled it carefully, maybe it wouldn't ruin things." "By lying to me?" Evelyn looked down. "He made a terrible mistake, but I don't think he did it out of cruelty." I wanted to believe that, but I couldn't. Not yet. After a long silence, I asked, "Did you know your brother-in-law well, Michael?" She nodded slowly. "He was my husband's younger brother. Brilliant, charming, a little wild. He disappeared from the family years before you were born. We didn't hear much after that, just that he'd moved out west, got into trouble, then vanished again." "Did you know he had a child?" "No," she whispered. "We never knew. If we had—" She looked at me, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I swear, Lily, we would have loved you all the same." That broke something in me. I didn't want her pity, but hearing those words, "we would have loved you," made the ache in my chest almost unbearable. "I wish I could believe that," I said quietly. "You can," she said. "You're part of this family, no matter what the bloodlines say." I stood, shaking my head. I don't even know what that means anymore.
Before I could leave, Evelyn said one more thing. Michael wasn't a bad man, Lily. He just made choices that hurt a lot of people. But you don't have to carry that weight. Don't punish yourself for something that wasn't your fault. I drove away in silence. Her words echoed in my head. You don't have to carry that weight. But how could I not? I felt like my whole identity had been rewritten. My husband was part of the same family tree I never knew existed, and he'd chosen to hide that truth from me. That night, I finally opened the envelope Grace had mailed me weeks ago, the one I hadn't been able to face. Inside was a letter in her neat handwriting. My dear Lily, you were the best thing that ever happened to me, even if I wasn't ready for you. Michael loved you in his own broken way, but he was too young and too scared to do right by you. I made the hardest choice of my life when I let you go. If you ever find this letter, please know you were never unwanted. You were loved even before you took your first breath. Tears blurred the ink as I read it. For the first time, I realized that my pain wasn't just about Mark. It was about a lifetime of feeling like a question mark in my own story. The next morning, I called my adoptive mom. I hadn't talked to her since the night everything exploded. Mom, I said, my voice trembling, I found out who my biological father was. She was quiet for a long moment, then said softly, Do you want to tell me about it? And I did. I told her everything, about Grace, about Michael Reynolds, about Mark. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she said something that changed how I saw everything. Sweetheart, biology doesn't define your heart. You are who you are because of the choices you've made, not the blood that runs through you. I wiped my eyes. But how do I live with this? She said, one day at a time, and maybe, when you're ready, you forgive him, not for him, but for you. A week later, I got a message from Mark's sister Anna. She said, You should come by the house. There's something you need to see. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. When I arrived, Anna led me into her late uncle Michael Reynolds' old study, the one Evelyn had kept locked for years. This was his, she said, handing me a faded leather journal. Mom found it after you left. It's full of letters and notes, mostly about you. My heart thudded. As I flipped it open, inside, in slanted handwriting, was my name. Lily, if you ever find this, I hope you know I loved you. I wasn't brave enough to be your father, but I never stopped thinking about you. If my family ever meets you, tell them I'm sorry. I pressed the journal to my chest, sobbing. For the first time, the man who'd been a ghost in my story finally felt real. That night I called Mark. He answered on the first ring. Lily? I said, I found Michael's journal. He talked about me. There was silence. Then, I know, Mom told me she gave it to Anna. Are you okay? I don't know, I admitted, but I'm not angry anymore. Just tired. I understand, he said softly. I need time. A lot of it. But I also need honesty, Mark. Ever. You have my word, he said, voice trembling. No more lies. The morning after I spoke to Mark, the world felt different. Not lighter, but clearer. The fog that had hung over me for weeks started to lift, one small patch at a time. I could finally breathe without the weight of questions pressing against my chest. I stayed with Mia a little longer, spending quiet mornings walking her dog down the oak-lined streets. The late summer air carried a hint of warmth, but I could already smell fall creeping in. I'd catch myself thinking about the years Mark and I spent decorating pumpkins or walking through farmers markets. Those memories were still beautiful. They just hurt now. I didn't know what to do with all that hurt, so I decided to turn it into something else. Mia worked as a social worker, and one morning over coffee, she said, You ever think about volunteering at the community center? We've got a mentorship program for foster girls. They could really use someone like you. At first I laughed. Someone like me? You mean a complete emotional disaster? She smiled gently. I mean someone who knows what it's like to feel lost, but still shows up anyway. Her words stuck with me. That afternoon, I drove to the center. The building wasn't much, an old red brick school turned into a shelter for at-risk teens. But the minute I stepped inside, I felt something shift. The smell of crayons, old books, and faint coffee reminded me of simpler times. A young girl with dark curls and a guarded stare was sitting by herself at a table. She couldn't have been more than 15. I sat across from her. "Hey," I said softly. "Mind if I sit?" She shrugged. "It's a free country." I smiled. "Yeah, it is." We talked a little about school, music, nothing deep. But when I told her I'd been adopted too, her expression changed. "Did you ever find them?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "I did." "It was complicated." "Was it worth it?" I thought about that for a long moment before answering. Even when it hurts, the truth always matters, because at least then, you know who you are. She nodded slowly, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Maybe hope? Maybe understanding? When I left that day, I sat in my car for a while, staring out the window. I realized something. Maybe I couldn't change how my story began, but I could change how it continued. A few weeks passed. I still hadn't moved back home, but Mark and I started talking again. Really talking. No secrets, no pretending. We met at a quiet diner halfway between Mia's house and ours, just two people trying to figure out if love could survive the truth. He looked tired, but softer somehow. There was no defensiveness in his eyes, just a quiet regret. He said, "I've been seeing a therapist, trying to understand why I handled things the way I did, why I froze instead of being honest with you." I nodded. "That's good. I've been talking to someone too." We sat in silence for a while, the kind that isn't awkward anymore, just fragile. He finally said, "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want to make things right, however that looks for you." I studied him carefully. "You can't make this right, Mark, but maybe we can make something honest out of what's left." His eyes softened. "If you're willing to try, so am I." Later that night, I drove back to our house. The first time in months. The porch light was still out, just how I'd left it. Inside, everything was covered in a thin film of dust. But the photo frames were still there. Our wedding picture, family trips, the day we adopted our dog. And then, tucked behind one of the frames, I found something new. A small envelope with my name on it, in Mark's handwriting. I opened it slowly. "Lily, I know words can't erase what I've done, but I've been thinking about the moment I fell in love with you. It wasn't the first date or even the wedding day. It was the night we sat on the floor eating takeout, laughing about nothing. And I realized I'd never felt that safe with anyone before. You've always been the most honest soul I've ever known. And even though I broke that honesty, I hope someday I can earn it back. Not as your husband, but as someone who still believes in your light." I sat there, reading it over and over, until the tears came again. But this time, they didn't burn. They felt like release. In the following months, I kept volunteering at the center. I started writing, too. Little essays about identity, about loss, about rebuilding when the ground gives out beneath you. One of them got published in a local paper under the title, "When the Truth Changes Everything." It wasn't about Mark or my father directly, but about finding peace after discovering who you really are. The response was overwhelming. Letters from people who'd gone through adoption, betrayal, family secrets. They said my story helped them feel seen. And that's when I realized something powerful. Maybe everything that broke me was never meant to destroy me. Maybe it was meant to give me something to share. One chilly afternoon, I met Mark again at the park. The trees were almost bare and the sky glowed pale gold. He smiled when he saw me. "You look happier," he said. "I am. Not because everything is fixed, it's not, but because I finally stopped trying to control what's already happened." He nodded. "Are you still angry?" "I admit it, sometimes, but it doesn't own me anymore." He smiled sadly. "That's more than I deserve." We walked for a while, quietly. Then I said, "I think it's okay for us to love each other differently now. Maybe not as husband and wife, but as two people who once meant everything to each other." He looked down, his voice soft. "I can live with that." That night, as I drove home alone, I rolled the window down and let the cool air rush in. I thought about Grace, about Michael, about the family I'd gained and lost in the same breath. The truth had broken me, but it had also set me free. Because sometimes finding who you are means losing who you used to be. And somewhere between all that loss and forgiveness, I'd finally found myself. The first snow of winter came early that year. Soft flakes drifted across the windshield as I drove north toward the town where my father, Michael, had grown up. The letter I'd found among his things kept calling me back. It mentioned a little house near the lake, the place where he said he'd always feel closest to peace. I hadn't planned to come here, but the more time passed, the more I felt a quiet pull, not of pain, but of understanding. I needed to see where it all began. The drive was long, winding through back roads lined with frozen trees and quiet fields. It was one of those days where the world felt muffled, like everything had been wrapped in cotton. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight, as if letting go might make me turn back. When I finally reached the lake, the sky had gone pale gray. The water shimmered under the thin ice, still and endless. A few houses sat on the shore, small, worn down, with smoke rising from old chimneys. One of them had a white fence with chipped paint and a mailbox that read Reynolds. That was my father's last name. I parked and sat in silence for a moment, feeling my pulse echo in my chest. Then I got out, boots crunching on the thin crust of snow. The air smelled of pine and smoke, familiar and strange all at once. An older woman opened the door before I even knocked. She looked to be in her late 70s, her gray hair pinned neatly back, her blue eyes sharp and searching. "Can I help you?" she asked, cautious but kind. I swallowed hard. "I'm Lily Carter. I believe my father, Michael Reynolds, used to live here." She blinked, her face softening with something like recognition. "Michael's daughter." I nodded slowly. "Oh, honey," she whispered, hand to her chest. "I thought I'd never meet you." She invited me in before I could even find my words. The house was warm, filled with the scent of cinnamon and old wood. Photographs lined the mantel. Most of them faded with time, but one caught my eye. A young man standing by the lake, smiling with a baby in his arms. I froze. "That's him," she said quietly. "And that's you." My throat tightened. You knew him?" She nodded, smiling sadly. "I'm his sister, Clara." "Your aunt?" The world seemed to tilt. I gripped the back of the couch to steady myself. "He talked about you," she went on, her voice soft but certain. "All the time. Even when he couldn't be with you, he carried your picture everywhere. Said he'd made mistakes he couldn't undo, but that you were the best part of him." Tears stung my eyes. I thought he left because he didn't care. Clara shook her head. No, sweetheart. He left because your mother's family made it impossible. They didn't want him around, said he wasn't good enough. And by the time he got his life together, she'd already remarried. He didn't want to confuse you. I sank into the old floral couch, the truth settling in heavy waves. He was trying to protect me? Clara nodded. In his own broken way, yes. He wrote you letters for years, you know. Most he never sent. He'd come here, sit by the water, and talk about what kind of woman you might have grown up to be. I wiped my eyes. He said he hoped I'd be kind. Clara smiled gently. You are. I can see it. She led me to a small wooden box on a side table. She wanted this to be yours, she said. Inside were dozens of envelopes, all addressed to me. Some were yellowed, some still sealed. The earliest one was dated the year after I was born. My hands shook as I opened the first one. Dear Lily, you won't remember me, and that's my fault. But I see your face every day in my mind. I hope you laugh like your mother, but dream like me. I hope when you look in the mirror, you know you were loved, even by a man who couldn't be there. I pressed the letter to my chest and sobbed. All the anger, confusion, and grief I'd carried for so long melted into something else, something tender and real. This man who had haunted my past wasn't a ghost anymore. He was just a father who made mistakes and paid for them every day of his life. Later, Clara made tea and we sat watching the snow fall outside the window. She used to sit there, she said, pointing to an old rocking chair by the fire. Said if he ever got the chance, he'd tell you everything himself. I smiled through my tears. Maybe he just did. She reached over and squeezed my hand. I think he'd be proud of the woman you've become. For the first time in years, I felt whole. Not because I'd filled in every missing piece, but because I'd finally stopped running from the emptiness. That night I stayed at a little inn nearby. I laid out the letters on the bed, one by one, reading until my eyes blurred. Each one carried his voice, softer, steadier, older with time. Some talked about regrets, others about hopes, but every single one ended the same way. Love always, Dad. When I finished the last one, dawn had started to break. The lake shimmered with pale light. I took the final letter outside and stood by the water. The air was cold enough to sting my cheeks, but I didn't mind. I whispered into the wind, I forgive you, Dad. And I think I finally forgive myself, too. I dropped the letter gently onto the water, watching it float away until it disappeared under the morning sun. Months later, back home, I started writing again. Not just essays, this time, but a book. The first chapter began, I found a baby photo of me in my husband's phone, but I didn't know it would lead me to my father's heart. It wasn't a story about betrayal anymore. It was a story of truth. Messy, painful, but freeing. Mark read the first few pages and smiled softly. You turned all that pain into something beautiful, he said. I had to, I told him. It was the only way to live again. We never went back to being husband and wife, but we became friends, real ones, and that somehow felt like the right kind of ending. One evening I stood by my window, watching the sunset spill gold across the sky. The world outside was quiet, but inside me, something had finally settled. Life doesn't always give you neat endings. Sometimes it gives you scattered truths, half-healed hearts, and second chances you never expected. But if you listen closely, even heartbreak can sound like grace. And as I closed my eyes that night, I knew The story of who I was wasn't defined by what was lost, but by what I had the courage to face.
Sometimes the people who hurt us most aren't villains. They're just human, flawed, frightened, trying to protect something they didn't know how to hold. I used to think truth always came with pain, but I've learned that pain can be a teacher too, one that shows you where the light gets in. If I hadn't found that photo, I might never have uncovered the truth. I might still be blaming a man who carried my picture in his wallet until the day he died. Life has a way of hiding mercy inside the very things that break us. So if you've ever discovered something that changed how you saw your past, a letter, a photo, a confession, remember, the truth doesn't always destroy. Sometimes it frees you. I found mine in a dusty box by a lake, inside the words of a man who never stopped loving me, even from afar. Would you have gone looking for answers? Or would you have left the past buried? Tell me what you think down in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, stay with me. There are more stories to tell, more truths to uncover, and more hearts to heal. Because sometimes the hardest stories to tell are the ones that remind us we're still capable of forgiveness, even for the people we thought we'd lost forever.